Cozy Tales Collective, where dreams begin and worries fade. Welcome back. Welcome to this moment of stillness, where the worries of the day melt away like waves returning to the sea. Breathe in and out like the tide, slow and steady. Feel your body relax with each gentle wave, washing away tension, carrying you toward rest. There is nothing to do, nothing to think about, only this quiet moment of serenity. Now, as you settle in, allow the story to carry you like the ocean's gentle rhythm. The Lighthouse Keeper's Secret. Chapter 1. The Arrival. The sea mist curled around the rocky cliffs as Ellie stepped off the small ferry onto the dock. Seagulls shrieked overhead, their wings slicing through the gray sky. The scent of salt and damp earth filled her lungs as she tightened her grip on her suitcase. "Ellie!" called a warm, familiar voice. She turned to see her grandfather, a sturdy man with a beard as wild as the waves, standing by the lighthouse. He waved her over, his weathered face breaking into a smile. "Grandpa!" Ellie ran up the worn path and into his arms. "Welcome back to Stormhaven," he said. "It's been too long." Ellie glanced up at the towering lighthouse, its white and red-striped walls vanishing into the mist. She had spent summers here before, but this time felt different. The air was charged, as if the island itself was holding its breath. Her grandfather led her inside, where the lighthouse's interior smelled of oil, old books, and the sea. Wooden stairs spiraled upward, leading to the lantern room where the great light shone each night, guiding ships away from the dangerous cliffs. "Still keeping the ship safe, Grandpa?" Ellie asked as he poured her a cup of tea. "Always," he said, a twinkle in his eye. "Though lately the light's been acting strange." Ellie frowned. "Strange how?" "You'll see." That night Ellie lay in bed, listening to the distant crash of waves. The lighthouse's beam swept rhythmically across the island, illuminating the mist. Then it flickered. She sat up. The light blinked in a pattern, short bursts followed by longer ones. Was it a message? Slipping on her sweater, Ellie crept upstairs. Her grandfather was asleep in his chair, his old journal resting on his chest. Careful not to wake him, she climbed to the lantern room. The great light pulsed steadily, but as she watched, it flickered again. Short, short, long. Pause. Short, long, long. Ellie scribbled the pattern in her notebook. It repeated every few minutes. "This isn't random," she whispered. Something, or someone, was sending a message. The next day, Ellie pored over her grandfather's old journals, searching for clues. Most of the pages contained ship logs, weather patterns, and lighthouse repairs, but one entry caught her eye. "The light follows the past. What it reveals must remain hidden." She traced her fingers over the ink. What did that mean? Determined to find out, she returned to the lantern room at sunset. As the lighthouse beamed across the island, she noticed something she hadn't before. A faint glimmer near the base of the tower where the rocky cliffs met the mist. Grabbing a lantern, she made her way down the craggy shoreline. The wind howled, but she pressed on until she reached the spot where the light had flashed. There, half buried in seaweed and sand, was a rusted metal hatch. Ellie hesitated, then yanked it open. A set of stone steps spiraled downward into darkness. With her heart pounding, she descended. At the bottom, she found an ancient chamber, its walls lined with bookshelves and maps. A wooden desk stood in the center, covered in yellowed journals and scattered papers. And in the middle of the room, atop a stone pedestal, sat a glowing crystal. Ellie stepped closer. The crystal pulsed with an eerie blue light, illuminating the chamber in an otherworldly glow. She reached out, and the moment her fingers brushed its surface, a vision engulfed her. She saw the island long before the lighthouse stood. A great storm raged, and a ship wrecked against the cliffs. Survivors staggered onto shore, carrying a chest filled with something they vowed to protect. Then she saw the lighthouse being built, not just as a beacon for ships, but as a shield for what lay hidden beneath it. The vision faded, and Ellie gasped. The lighthouse wasn't just guiding sailors, it was guarding a centuries-old secret. Footsteps echoed behind her. She whirled around to see her grandfather standing in the entrance, lantern in hand. "You found it," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "Grandpa, what is this place?" He sighed and stepped into the room, his fingers tracing the edges of an old map. "This island has always been special, Ellie. The crystal. It holds a power we don't fully understand. The lighthouse's light isn't just a signal to ships. It follows the energy of the crystal, revealing what needs to stay hidden." Ellie stared at the maps and journals, her mind spinning. But why? What are we protecting? Her grandfather gave her a solemn look. A treasure beyond gold or jewels, knowledge, a power that in the wrong hands could change everything. Ellie spent the next few days studying the maps and journals, learning about the ancient shipwreck and the crystal's strange abilities. The lighthouse's flickering wasn't just random, it was sending warnings, keeping away those who might seek to exploit its power. But now that she knew the truth, she faced a choice. One night, as she stood in the lantern room, watching the light pulse over the waves, her grandfather joined her. "You're a part of this now," he said. "The lighthouse has been our family's duty for generations, but it's not just about keeping the light on. It's about protecting what lies beneath." Ellie looked out at the vast sea, the mist curling around the island like a living thing. "I want to help," she said. Her grandfather smiled. "Then let's keep the light burning." As the lighthouse beam swept across the dark horizon, Ellie knew her summer on the island had changed her forever. She had uncovered a mystery, but more than that, she had become a guardian of something far greater than she had ever imagined. And as long as the lighthouse stood, its secret would remain safe. Chapter 2. The Shadows in the Mist. Ellie had never been more awake. The revelation of the hidden chamber beneath the lighthouse, the glowing crystal, and the truth her grandfather had kept for years. It was too much to take in all at once. But one thing was clear. She had a responsibility now. As dawn broke over Stormhaven Island, she stood at the top of the lighthouse, watching the mist roll over the waves. The rhythmic flash of the beacon pulsed like a heartbeat, steady and unyielding. She traced the flickering pattern in her notebook again, determined to understand its message. "You didn't sleep, did you?" She turned to find her grandfather standing in the doorway, his eyes heavy with age and knowledge. "There's too much to think about," Ellie admitted. He walked over and placed a hand on her shoulder. "The light has guarded this island for centuries, and so have we. But you don't have to figure everything out in one night." Ellie hesitated. "Grandpa, does anyone else know about the crystal?" His expression darkened. "A few have tried to uncover it over the years. Some out of curiosity, others with intentions less noble." She swallowed hard. "And what happened to them?" His silence was answer enough. A new mystery. Later that morning, Ellie wandered back down to the hidden chamber, determined to make sense of what she had seen. The old maps and journals covered the desk, their ink faded with time. She opened one and ran her fingers across a hand-drawn map of Stormhaven Island. It was different from modern maps. There were paths and markings that didn't exist anymore. One symbol caught her eye, a spiral drawn near the northern cliffs. It was the same symbol carved into the base of the crystal's pedestal. Excitement flickered in her chest. What was out there? Grabbing her backpack, she stuffed the map inside and climbed back up to the surface. The mist still hung thick over the cliffs, but Ellie felt a strange pull toward the spot marked on the map. She didn't notice the shadow watching her from the trees, the northern cliffs. Ellie hiked through the rocky terrain, her boots crunching against the damp earth. The cliffs overlooked the open sea, and the wind whipped through her hair as she carefully stepped closer to the edge. The mist made it hard to see, but she spotted something, a jagged rock formation protruding from the ground. As she approached, she saw carvings etched into the stone. Spirals, like the ones in the hidden chamber. Her pulse quickened. Someone had been here before. She ran her hand over the carvings, brushing away years of moss and lichen. Beneath her fingers, the stone was smoother than the surrounding rock, as if worn down by countless touches over time. And then she felt it, a faint hum, the same energy she had felt when she touched the crystal. The ground beneath her trembled slightly. She stumbled back, heart pounding. Had she triggered something? A gust of wind howled through the cliffs, carrying with it a distant voice. She froze. Had she imagined that? The mist thickened, swirling unnaturally around her. A deep, guttural sound rumbled in the distance. Something was coming. Ellie turned and ran. A warning from the past. She burst into the lighthouse, panting. "Grandpa!" Her grandfather looked up from his desk, startled. "Ellie, what is it?" "I found something, carvings on the northern cliffs. And then the mist. It moved. I heard something out there." His face went pale. He set down his pen, his hand suddenly unsteady. "You went to the cliffs?" "I found them on an old map," she said. "I think it's connected to the crystal." He exhaled slowly, as if deciding how much to tell her. "Ellie, there are places on this island that were meant to be forgotten." She shook her head. "But why? What's out there?" Instead of answering, he reached into his desk and pulled out an old journal. The cover was cracked with age. He opened it to a page filled with hasty, uneven handwriting. August 3rd, 1892. The mist has grown restless. Something stirs beneath the cliffs. The beacon flickers, warning us, but the outsiders do not listen. They dig where they should not. The island remembers. Ellie's stomach tightened. Who wrote this? One of the first lighthouse keepers, he said. He warned about the cliffs, about the mist. He believed something ancient lived beneath the island, something the lighthouse was built to keep at bay. A chill ran through her. And you believe him? Her grandfather looked out at the sea. I believe the lighthouse doesn't flicker for no reason. The stranger in the mist. That night, Ellie stayed awake, watching the beacon pulse across the waves. She couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed her back from the cliffs. Then she saw it. A figure standing just beyond the edge of the light, barely visible through the mist. Her breath caught. The figure didn't move. It stood still, watching, waiting. Ellie grabbed the flashlight from her nightstand and, against every instinct telling her not to, stepped outside. The night was cold, the air thick with salt and fog. She held the flashlight steady, shining it toward the figure. "Hello?" she called. The mist shifted. The figure was gone. A shiver ran down her spine. She wasn't alone on this island, a race against time. The next morning, Ellie told her grandfather what she had seen. His face grew hard. It's starting again. What is... He turned to the lighthouse's great beacon. The mist isn't natural, Ellie. It moves with purpose. The lighthouse keeps it in check. But if someone... He hesitated. If something is out there, it means the balance is shifting. Ellie's fingers tightened around the notebook in her hands. Then we need to find out why. Her grandfather met her gaze. You may have started that last night. She swallowed. What do we do? He walked to the base of the stairs and pulled a key from his pocket. There's something I haven't shown you yet. He led her down into the hidden chamber, past the desk and shelves, to a door she hadn't noticed before. He unlocked it and pushed it open, revealing another room. Inside, maps and journals lined the walls. A large wooden chest sat in the center, covered in dust. This is everything our family has kept hidden for generations, he said. If the lighthouse is warning us, we need to understand why. Ellie stared at the chest, her pulse quickening. She reached forward, brushing her fingers against the latch. Somewhere outside, the lighthouse flickered. The mist was moving again, and time was running out. Chapter 3. The Whispering Tide. Ellie's fingers trembled as she brushed dust off the old wooden chest. The hidden chamber beneath the lighthouse had already revealed so many secrets, but she had the feeling that whatever lay inside this chest would change everything. Her grandfather stood behind her, his expression unreadable. Go on, then, he said quietly. She hesitated for just a second before unfastening the heavy latch. The lid creaked open, revealing stacks of aged documents, brittle maps, and strange objects wrapped in cloth. The first thing that caught her eye was an old leather-bound journal. The cover bore the lighthouse's insignia, a spiral within a circle, the same symbol she had seen carved into the cliffs. Ellie opened it carefully. The handwriting was faded, but the words still held power. The sea is restless. The mist thickens. We cannot keep this hidden forever. The light is failing. Her heart pounded. Grandpa, what does this mean? He sighed, sitting down heavily on an old wooden stool. It means that the lighthouse's power is weakening. She looked up, startled. Weakening? But the light still shines. For now, he interrupted. But the mist is getting stronger and the balance is shifting. I was hoping we'd have more time before you had to know the truth. Ellie swallowed hard. What truth? Her grandfather gestured toward the documents inside the chest. This lighthouse isn't just for guiding ships, Ellie. It was built to contain something. And if the light goes out, that something will wake up. A warning from the past. Ellie turned the pages of the old journal, skimming through desperate entries written by past lighthouse keepers. Some described strange storms that came without warning. Others spoke of shipwrecks where the bodies of sailors were never found. But one entry, dated over 200 years ago, made her blood run cold. The island is not just land, it is a door. The mist is its breath, and what sleeps beneath it dreams of the sea. She looked up sharply. A door? To what? Her grandfather stood and walked to the chamber's stone walls, running his fingers along an old carving. They say that long before the lighthouse was built, there was something ancient here, something powerful. The first settlers of the island built stone markers trying to seal it away, but the mist, it always finds a way back. A lump formed in Ellie's throat. And the lighthouse? It was the only thing that kept it contained. The crystal inside it isn't just light, it's a kind of barrier. The beam keeps the mist at bay, keeps the island from waking up. He turned to her. But if it's failing, that means something is disturbing it. Ellie thought of the figure she had seen in the mist the night before, the way the cliffs had trembled beneath her touch. Something was changing. We need to fix the lighthouse, she said, determination rising in her chest. Her grandfather gave a weary smile. It's not that simple. If the light is weakening, it means the island itself is shifting. And that means we need to find the source of the disturbance before it's too late. A stranger arrives before Ellie could respond. The sound of knocking echoed from upstairs. She and her grandfather exchanged wary glances. Visitors were rare on the island, especially this late in the day. They hurried up from the hidden chamber and into the lighthouse's main entrance. When her grandfather pulled the door open, a man stood on the doorstep. He was tall, dressed in a long black coat that seemed too dry for the misty air around him. His sharp gray eyes flickered between them, and Ellie felt a sudden, inexplicable chill. "Evening," the man said, his voice smooth but devoid of warmth. "My name is Elias Vane. I'm a historian, studying old maritime legends." Ellie's grandfather stiffened beside her. "There's nothing for you here, Mr. Vane." The man tilted his head slightly, as if amused. "Oh, I think there is. I've been following the history of this lighthouse for quite some time. There are stories, you see. legends of a place where the sea mist whispers and the rocks remember things that should have been forgotten. His gaze landed on Ellie, lingering just a second too long. I believe there's more to this island than meets the eye. Ellie clenched her jaw. He knew something. Her grandfather straightened, his voice cold. The lighthouse is private property. There's no history here that concerns you. Vane smiled, but there was no kindness in it. Of course. Just a curious traveler, then. He nodded politely and turned to leave, walking slowly down the path toward the village. Ellie waited until he was out of earshot before whispering, "Grandpa, who is he?" Her grandfather's eyes were dark. Trouble. A desperate search. That night Ellie couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the stranger's gray eyes, felt the weight of the words in the journal. The lighthouse's power was failing. Something was waking up. Unable to shake the feeling that time was running out, she grabbed her flashlight and crept back down to the hidden chamber. If the answer was in the documents, she had to find it. She sifted through old scrolls, maps, and pages filled with cryptic warnings. Finally, she found something. A diagram of the lighthouse, but different. There was a symbol near the base of the tower, matching the ones she had seen on the cliffs. An annotation beside it read, "When the light flickers, the path will reveal itself." Ellie's mind raced. Was there another hidden passage? Something deeper beneath the lighthouse? Determined, she grabbed her lantern and hurried outside. The mist was thicker than before, clinging to her skin as she made her way around the base of the lighthouse. She ran her hands along the cold stone, searching for anything out of place. Then she saw it. A faint glow beneath the ivy. She pulled back the vines, revealing an old stone door carved into the lighthouse's foundation. The spiral symbol was etched in its center. Her heart pounded. Taking a deep breath, she pressed her palm against the symbol. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the stone trembled, and with a low, grinding sound, the door began to open. A rush of stale air met her as she peered into the darkness beyond. Steps led downward, carved from the very rock of the island. And at the bottom, something glowed. What lies beneath? Ellie hesitated, glancing back at the lighthouse. Her grandfather had said the island was a door. If she went down there, was she opening it? But she had come too far to stop now. Taking a deep breath, she stepped inside. The air was damp and thick with the scent of salt and stone. Her lantern flickered as she descended the steps, the glow at the bottom growing brighter. The walls were covered in ancient carvings, spirals and symbols she didn't understand. Then she reached the bottom. In the center of the cavern was another crystal, larger than the one beneath the lighthouse. It pulsed with an eerie blue light, veins of energy crackling across its surface. And in front of it stood Elias Vane. Ellie froze. Vane turned, his eyes gleaming in the dim light. "I was wondering when you'd find it." Her breath caught. "What are you doing here?" He smiled, stepping aside to reveal the massive crystal behind him. "You think your family has been protecting the island, Ellie, but the truth is, they've been keeping this secret from the world, and I intend to set it free." The mist curled around them, whispering, and then the ground began to shake. Chapter 4. The Awakening Mist. The cavern trembled beneath Ellie's feet, dust and loose stones tumbling from the ceiling. The massive crystal pulsed with eerie blue light, its energy crackling like distant lightning. Across from her, Elias Vane stood with a satisfied smirk, his fingers tracing the spirals carved into the cavern walls. "You feel that, don't you?" Vane said, his voice calm despite the rumbling earth. "The island is stirring." Ellie clenched her fists. "You don't understand what you're doing. The lighthouse keeps the mist at bay. It's not just a warning, it's a barrier." Vane tilted his head. "Ah, but that's the thing about barriers, isn't it? They only last as long as someone is willing to maintain them. And your family has been keeping this one up for far too long." The crystal pulsed again, and Ellie felt the hair on her arms stand on end. The energy in the air was thick, like a storm waiting to break. Somewhere above them, the lighthouse's beacon flickered erratically. She swallowed hard. If the light goes out, the island will return to what it was before, Vane interrupted smoothly. He stepped closer to the crystal, placing a hand against its glowing surface. A place of power, a place of truth. Ellie's pulse pounded in her ears. "You don't even know what's buried here, do you?" Vane's smirk widened. "Oh, but I do. The mist isn't just fog, Ellie, it's memory. It's the island itself, waiting to reclaim what was stolen from it." A deep, resonant hum echoed through the cavern. The blue glow of the crystal flickered, shifting to a sickly green. The spirals along the walls shimmered, and for the first time, Ellie noticed they weren't just carvings. They were moving. Something was waking up. The mist remembers. Ellie took a step back, glancing toward the stairway. She needed to get to her grandfather. He would know what to do. But before she could move, Vane lifted his hand from the crystal and whispered something under his breath. The mist began to pour into the cavern. It slipped through cracks in the stone, curling along the ground like living tendrils. Ellie's breath hitched as it brushed against her skin, cold but alive, pulsing with something ancient and knowing. She could hear whispers in the air, voices carried on the mist. Some sounded like old sailors, their words lost to time. Others murmured in languages she didn't recognize. Then one voice stood out from the rest. "Ellie." She froze. The voice was familiar. She turned sharply, searching through the swirling mist. "Who's there?" A figure took shape in the fog. A woman with dark hair, her features blurred and shifting, as though the mist was struggling to hold her together. Ellie's chest tightened. "Mom?" The figure flickered. Her eyes filled with sadness. "You have to stop this." Ellie's mind reeled. Her mother had died when she was a child, lost to the sea in a storm. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. Vane chuckled. "The mist is full of memories, Ellie. It shows us what we've lost. But the question is, are you brave enough to listen?" Ellie forced herself to look away from the ghostly figure of her mother. This wasn't right. The mist was trying to pull her in, to make her lose herself in its whispers. She gritted her teeth and focused on the lighthouse. That was the only thing that mattered. She turned and bolted for the staircase. Vane's voice rang out behind her. "Run all you want, but the door has already opened." Ellie didn't stop. The lighthouse fades. She climbed the stone steps 2 at a time, her legs burning. When she reached the surface, she stumbled out into the night, gasping for air. The lighthouse stood tall against the dark sky, but something was wrong. The light, once steady and strong, was flickering weakly, struggling to stay lit. Her grandfather was already outside, staring up at the tower with a grim expression. "Ellie," he called, relief and urgency in his voice. "What happened?" She ran to him. "It's Vane. He's trying to shut the lighthouse down. He found another crystal beneath the island. It's doing something to the mist." Her grandfather's face darkened. "Then we don't have much time." He grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the lighthouse door. Inside, the walls trembled as if the very foundation of the building was weakening. The great mechanism that powered the beacon groaned, the gears grinding unevenly. Her grandfather moved to the control panel, adjusting the levers with practiced speed. "The lighthouse is powered by the crystal in the lantern room. If Vane has disturbed the balance, we'll need to reinforce it. Fast." Ellie nodded, her hands shaking. "What do we do?" Her grandfather turned to her. "We need to realign the light, but I can't do it alone. You need to go to the lantern room and stabilize the crystal while I work from here." Ellie didn't hesitate. She sprinted up the spiral staircase, the wooden steps creaking beneath her. The higher she climbed, the colder the air became, as if the mist was pressing against the walls, trying to get in. When she reached the lantern room, she gasped. The crystal at the heart of the lighthouse, once a brilliant blue, was fading, its light flickering weakly. The mist pressed against the glass windows, swirling in frustration, seeking a way inside. She ran to the crystal and placed her hands on it. A shock of energy surged through her fingertips. A choice to make images flooded her mind. She saw the first lighthouse keepers, their hands bloodied as they carved the spirals into the stone. She saw storms that should have drowned the island but never reached the shore. She saw the mist, ancient and restless, forever searching for a way back. And then she saw herself, standing at the edge of the cliffs, the mist swirling around her feet. A voice whispered in her ear, "Let it go, Ellie." She gasped and pulled back. The crystal pulsed beneath her touch, waiting for her decision. Let the lighthouse fail, and the mist would reclaim the island, or fight against the inevitable and keep the balance for just a little longer. She clenched her fists. No. Taking a deep breath, she pressed both hands against the crystal and focused. The light inside it flickered, then flared, brighter, stronger. The mist outside the lighthouse recoiled, writhing against the windows. The whispers in her ears grew frantic, then faded. Below her, she heard the gears groan back into motion. The lighthouse was stabilizing. She collapsed to the floor, breathless. A moment later, her grandfather appeared in the doorway, his eyes wide with relief. "You did it," he murmured. Ellie looked up at the glowing crystal, still faintly pulsing beneath the glass. For now. Her grandfather helped her to her feet. "Vane?" Ellie swallowed hard. "Still down there. But I don't think he'll stop." Her grandfather nodded. a shadow passing over his face. Then neither can we. Ellie took one last look at the beacon, shining strong against the dark sky. The mist had been pushed back, but it wasn't gone, and deep beneath the island, something was still waiting. Chapter 5. The Tide Turns. The lighthouse stood strong against the midnight sky, its beacon once again casting its protective glow across the waves. But Ellie knew this was only a temporary victory. The mist still lingered at the island's edges, swirling in defiance. Deep beneath the earth, something ancient was still stirring, and Elias Vane was still out there. She turned to her grandfather, who was adjusting the gears in the control room. He looked exhausted, his hands shaking slightly as he tightened a bolt. "This isn't over, is it?" she asked. He sighed and shook his head. "No, Ellie, it's not." He wiped his brow. "You stabilized the lighthouse, but the balance has already been disrupted. The mist will keep pushing back until it finds a way through. And Vane, he won't stop until he gets what he came for." Ellie clenched her fists. "Then we have to stop him first." Her grandfather gave her a long, thoughtful look. "Stopping him is one thing. Understanding why he's here, that's another. The mist calls to certain people. It tempts them, but it also remembers them." Ellie frowned. "You think it's speaking to him the way it tried to speak to me?" "I don't know," he admitted. "But if he's been studying the lighthouse for as long as he claims, he might know more about what we're dealing with than we do." Ellie thought of the mist's whispers, of the way it had shown her a vision of her mother. Had Vane seen something too? A cold breeze drifted through the lighthouse door, carrying the scent of salt and something older, something that didn't belong to the living. She turned toward the darkness outside. "We have to find him." Into the fog. The island was eerily silent as Ellie and her grandfather made their way toward the cavern where she had last seen Vane. The mist thickened around them, curling at their ankles, reluctant to let them pass. Every step felt heavier. The whispers returned, faint and indistinct. Her grandfather suddenly stopped. "Ellie." She turned to him and froze. The mist was moving, not drifting or swirling as it normally did, but shifting, forming shapes, silhouettes, figures with hollow eyes and mouths half open in silent warning. The ghosts of the past. Ellie's breath caught as one of them stepped forward. It was the same figure she had seen in the cavern, the woman who looked like her mother. "Go back." The voice was layered, as if many voices were speaking at once. Ellie swallowed hard. "I can't." The mist woman tilted her head. "If you go forward, there is no turning back." Ellie's grandfather took her hand, his grip firm. "We don't have a choice." The figures didn't move, but they also didn't stop them. Ellie forced herself to step forward, right through the misty form of the woman. The air went ice cold for a brief moment, then the figure dissolved. Ellie shuddered. "Come on, we're close." The Chamber of Echoes. They reached the cavern entrance, but something was different. The stone door that Ellie had opened earlier was now covered in new carvings, spirals that pulsed faintly, as if alive. The mist here was thicker, heavier, pooling into the air like breath exhaled from the earth itself. Ellie reached out to touch the carvings, but her grandfather grabbed her wrist. Wait. A low sound rumbled from deep within the cavern. A heartbeat. Then Elias Vane's voice drifted from the shadows. You should have left while you had the chance. Ellie turned sharply, spotting him at the base of the chamber, standing before the massive crystal. But he looked different. His usual smug confidence was gone. His face was pale, his eyes wide with something between awe and fear. The crystal pulsed behind him, now completely green, its veins pulsing like it was alive. The mist thickened around him, clinging to his clothes, seeping into his skin. Ellie took a cautious step forward. Vane, stop this. He exhaled a breathy laugh. Stop? Ellie, don't you see? It's too late to stop anything. The island, it's awake. The ground trembled beneath their feet. Ellie's grandfather grabbed her shoulder. We have to end this now. She turned back to Vane. You don't know what you're dealing with. The mist, it's not here to give you power. It's here to take. Vane smirked, but there was uncertainty in his eyes. Then maybe it's time we finally listen. The choice. A sharp gust of wind howled through the cavern, carrying the sound of rushing water. The mist thickened, tendrils reaching toward the crystal like grasping fingers. Ellie felt something shift in the air, like the final moment before a storm breaks. And then she realized the mist wasn't just waking up, it was hungry. The spirals on the walls shimmered, and the voices in the mist grew louder. Vane took an unsteady step back, his breath quickening. What's happening? Ellie turned to her grandfather. The lighthouse beam. It's the only thing keeping this contained. If the mist spreads past the island... Her grandfather nodded grimly. It won't stop. Vane's smirk was gone. So, what? We lock it away again? Bury the truth? Ellie stared at the pulsing crystal, at the mist writhing around them. No, we don't just lock it away, we end it. She turned to her grandfather. The lighthouse crystal, it's connected to this one, right? He nodded. They're two halves of the same power, one to contain, the other to guide. Ellie set her jaw. Then we need to destroy this one. Vane's eyes widened. You don't know what that will do. Ellie ignored him and turned back to the crystal. It was pulsing rapidly now, reacting to her presence. She stepped closer and placed her hands against its smooth surface. Energy surged through her, visions flashing across her mind. Storms, shipwrecks, people lost to the mist. It had been feeding on them for centuries. It needed them, and it would never stop. She closed her eyes and focused. Not this time. A warmth spread through her fingertips, an energy different from the mist's cold hunger. The lighthouse's light, the same energy she had felt when she saved the beacon. The mist recoiled, twisting violently. Vane yelled something behind her, but she didn't hear him. With one final push, Ellie sent every ounce of energy she had into the crystal. It cracked, then shattered. The mist breaks. A deafening sound filled the cavern like the roar of the ocean itself. The mist howled, its tendrils writhing in agony as the energy holding it together collapsed. The spirals on the walls flickered and vanished. The mist disappeared. Ellie fell to her knees, gasping. Her grandfather knelt beside her. "Ellie, are you all right?" She blinked up at him. The cavern was still. The mist was gone. Elias Vane stood motionless, staring at the place where the crystal had been. His hands were shaking. "It's over," Ellie whispered. For the first time in centuries, the island was silent. A new dawn. By the time Ellie and her grandfather returned to the lighthouse, the first light of dawn was breaking over the sea. The beacon still shone, steady and bright. Ellie looked out at the horizon, feeling lighter than she had in days. Her grandfather placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did good, kid." She smiled. "So, what now?" He chuckled. "Now we keep the light burning." Ellie looked out at the waves. For the first time in a long time, they were calm, and Stormhaven Island, her island, was finally free.